Vietnam scrambling to buy more U.S. goods, including security and defense products, as it tries to bargain for postponement to 46% U.S. tariffs due to hit tomorrow. The country's leader, To Lam, has asked President Donald Trump for a delay of at least 45 days. That's to allow for further negotiations to achieve a more balanced trade relationship. Deputy Prime Minister Phoc made an urgent trip to Washington on Monday. It's unclear, though, if talks with U.S. officials could be held before reciprocal tariffs take effect tomorrow. Hanoi has been making desperate bids to appease Washington, slashing import levies on a range of products to show that it is prepared to address an imbalance that widened to a $123 billion surplus last year. Vietnam has been hit with one of the highest rates alongside Cambodia, which faces a 49% levy. Prime Minister Hun Manet has outlined a two-step approach in response. This includes reducing tariffs on around 85 American goods from 35% to 5%. And if Washington responds positively, Phnom Penh will send a high-level delegation to negotiate further trade terms. And other Asian economies firming up their responses and scheduling talks with U.S. officials in Washington as they brace for the impact of Mr. Trump's tariffs tomorrow. Indonesia's chief economic minister will lead a high-level delegation in the U.S. next week to discuss ways to soften the blow of tariffs. Southeast Asia's largest economy earlier unveiled tax reductions on U.S. electronic goods and steel and plans to buy more American products like soybeans. The finance minister also eyeing more exports to the United States to replace those from Vietnam, Bangladesh, Thailand and China. Thailand has pledged to increase American imports, lower some taxes and address non-tariff barriers. The country's finance minister is traveling to the United States this week. In East Asia, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and Mr. Trump agreed to open trade talks. This follows a 25-minute phone call last night. Japan's economy minister has been picked to lead those talks, and several officials are reportedly already on their way to the U.S. South Korea's acting president Han Duck-soo also held a phone call with the American leader. As Seoul looks for its way to increase U.S. imports, the trade minister has left for talks with U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer in Washington to discuss what he calls America's problematic tariff calculation given their existing free trade pact. Taiwan, meanwhile, says it's open to negotiations with the U.S., quote, at any time. The island has proposed a zero-tariff regime with Washington, along with an increase in investment and a removal of trade barriers, while Hong Kong says it will sign more free trade pacts amid what the city's leader has called ruthless U.S. tariffs. And for more analysis on this, we're joined by Jayant Menon. He is visiting senior fellow at the Regional Economic Studies program at ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. Dr. Menon, we've seen different countries react in different ways to these tariffs. Japan's attempt to engage with the U.S. met with a very positive response, but rather less so for Vietnam and Cambodia.
Yeah, so I guess, size really does matter. Japan is, one of the largest economies in the world, very important strategic partner beyond it just economic relations. So I guess this is where size matters. But I think this is also why I've been advising the smaller countries to wait and try and negotiate as a group. In the case of Vietnam and Cambodia, the obvious grouping is ASEAN, and there are meetings coming up in KL, and there will be the opportunity to try and develop a coherent joint position and to put that as a group with size and influence to the U.S. to try and get the similar kind of treatment that Japan has been able to get on its own.
Well, ASEAN's trade with the U.S., Dr. Menon, it makes up 11.2% of the U.S.'s total global trade. So size in that instance might count for something. But if we look at Vietnam's recent engagement with the White House, during which Vietnam promised zero tariffs, and Pete Navarro, that's the White House Senior Counsel for Trade and Manufacturing, responded to that by saying, zero tariffs mean nothing to us because it's the non-tariff cheating that matters. Is there any lesson there that ASEAN can draw from Vietnam's encounter so that when it approaches the US, it does so not just with the advantage of size, but with a better offer?
I think, it is true that the real game these days is about non-tariff barriers. Tariff barriers around the world have been coming down sharply over decades. And in ASEAN, they're already very low. The trade-weighted average is, 2 or 3%. So at the same time that tariffs have come down, non-tariff barriers have gone up. But it's also a very convenient sort of excuse to say, oh, yes, but, it's all about non-tariff barriers and you haven't addressed them. We have to be a bit more specific. This is why the reciprocal tariffs that we expected, we thought would be a function of tariff and tariff equivalents of non-tariff barriers. There are ways of converting these non-tariff barriers into tariff equivalents by looking at what they do to prices. But that never happened. The so-called reciprocal tariffs have everything to do with the size of the bilateral deficit in goods, and really the assumption that this is only because of tariff and non-tariff barriers is misplaced. There are many reasons why you run deficits and surpluses. Sometimes it's because of these barriers, but in this case where, most tariffs are low and non-tariff barriers exist, but not in a binding way in all cases, I think, Mr. Navarro is barking up the wrong tree.
All right, the computation of these reciprocal tariffs, so that was deficit over exports. There may be issues with that particular style of computation, but in a way, however one questions it, if that's the way they calculate it, there might be a simple way of meeting objections based on that calibration, which these countries can do, can they not?
Well, they can actually point out, as everyone has, that this is a measure that can't properly represent the kind of negotiating items, right, which is tariffs or non-tariff barriers or whatever you think is unfair trade. Just saying that you run a deficit with me means that there must be some unfairness going on is, contradictory to the reason countries trade. Countries trade because of differences in factor endowments, in labor and capital and technology costs, and those sorts of factors come into play, right? So you take the example of the country with the highest tariff. It's not Cambodia, actually. It's Lesotho at 50%. Cambodia is 49%. Lesotho is a very poor country that happens to have diamond mines, and it exports diamonds to the US. It has a per capita income of about $3, right? Wage of $3 a day, and average income. It's a very poor country. Now, what is Lesotho going to buy to offset the huge sales of diamonds to the luxury stores in New York? Nothing, right? And the same thing with Cambodia. Cambodia sells garments, low-cost garments, right? It can't buy the kinds of services, sophisticated services that the US wants to sell.
Dr. Menon, I really apologize, but we're running out of time, but I do want to get this final question because you, more than others, are upbeat that this could end as quickly as it could start. Tell me why it would end. Why are you so upbeat on the outcome of this latest round of trade? Or final question.
Well, I think I'm not necessarily upbeat, but I think there's a possibility in this totally uncertain environment that anything can happen and very quickly. It can go either way very quickly. We've seen it deteriorate very sharply, very quickly. I think we can also see it suddenly end. I mean, I think very soon Trump will realize that this is a no-win situation, but he will not admit it, of course. He will claim victory, looking for something to peg it on. And if there is a cut in interest rates, he might peg it on that. If the stock markets finally feel they've hit a bottom because they've factored in all the negativities already out there, he might use that to try and back off. But I think the pressure to actually stem this slide is rising, and the indicators that Trump looks at, stock markets, and also inflation, prices will start rising visibly very soon. These are the things that he will need to consider seriously, and as soon as they become visible, he will find a way, I think, of ending it. But then, who knows? Anything is possible with this administration.
Oh, thanks, Dr. Jayant Menon, visiting senior fellow at the Regional Economic Studies Program at ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute.